Welcome back to the Word on Fire Show. I'm Matthew Petrusek, Senior Director of the Word on Fire Institute and the host of the Word on Fire Show. Thank you for joining us. Hollywood is not known for being friendly to Christianity in general or Catholicism in particular, especially nowadays. Unfortunately, there is no shortage of storylines and characters that mock and even demonize believers. At the same time, however, whenever the film industry wishes to depict a religious-looking scene or add a transcendent element to the plot, it frequently employs Catholic architecture, Catholic sacramentals, and even Catholic priests to do so. So what should we make of this ambivalence to the faith? What does Hollywood get wrong? And perhaps to our surprise, what does Hollywood get right about Catholicism and the priesthood? And what do these portrayals tell us more broadly about the entertainment industry's potential openness to God's existence, the divinity of Christ, good and evil, and even life after death? Here to take a look at some pivotal classic and contemporary films that prominently feature Catholicism and Catholic priests with an eye to unpacking their significance for the wider entertainment culture is Bishop Robert Barron. And alert, there will be spoilers. Bishop, welcome back to the studio.
Thanks, Matt. Always good to be with you.
So today we're looking at the relationship between Hollywood and the portrayal of Catholicism in general and Catholic priests in particular.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, have you seen any good or perhaps not so good movies recently?
A few. Now, this will be airing, I think, after the Oscars. And we're recording it prior to the Oscars, but I like to see some of the Oscar-nominated movies. So I saw Sinners recently. I saw Marty Supreme recently. And I saw Hamnet. And all were interesting in their own way. Now this is I'll go on a limb, now this is prior to the Oscars, and say Sinners is going to win Best Picture. And I'm saying it for the same reason I predicted years ago that The Shape of Water would win, and indeed it did. So we'll see now if I'm right. I don't know. And I've actually written something on Sinners that'll be coming out. But Hamnet I liked. I'm a big Shakespeare guy, and Hamnet's an interesting look at the death of Shakespeare's son and how that influenced his writing of Hamlet. And anyway, I like that movie a lot. And then Marty Supreme was interesting. The movie about a ping pong hustler. And I kept thinking, I just wondering why he chose this script of all the scripts.
Yeah, right.
But it was a quirky, interesting character study kind of movie. So I like that.
Good. Well, it's a good bridge into our topic today.
Yeah.
We'll be looking at a few movies in more detail, but Bishop, you've been a film aficionado for a long time. And in fact, the first YouTube video you did was on Martin Scorsese's The Departed. So just let's please set the table for us, just talking about the importance of film to you and to the ministry you founded, Word on Fire.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I got a lot of it from my mother. My mother loved movies, and she always talked about, and this goes back a long way with my mother, that she would go to movies as a kid, and she'd watch the double feature. And my mother brought us to movies when we were little kids, and she always loved them, So I did too from the beginning. And I just think they're one of the great bearers of the popular culture today. So yes, books and, journals of high opinion and all that. But if you want to see what's on the mind of the culture, I think movies are very revealing, very telling. So I always felt from the beginning of my work to find religious themes in movies is a way to get into people's hearts. Mm-hmm. Where if you begin just by appealing to, high academic ideas, it might not do it. But if you can find something buried in the movies, which I think you can very often, it's a good evangelical strategy. So I like movies from an entertainment standpoint, but also as an evangelical strategy. I think it's important to use them.
I know our listeners will want you to opine on this, but AI is now entering into the film space. What's your take on the use of computers to generate entire scripts, entire cinematography, everything? I
don't like it. What is it? Whenever someone says AI, something in me tightens. I just don't like it. And it's the very fact that it's so good that it can produce a kind of simulacrum, both of consciousness, but also of artistic production. There's something about thinking something through and living through it, that your life informs what you're doing. And that AI will never really be creative. It can't be. It's just taking what already exists and it's rearranging it or something. But like real breakthroughs of creativity, that's a matter of of consciousness, of freedom, and of spirituality. So that's what makes me nervous about AI, that it will become a lazy substitute for real creativity.
Also, want to get your sort of your general take on this question, as it has to do with the Hollywood film industry and the Catholic Church. And there seems to be kind of a ambivalence or maybe even love-hate relationship there from the Hollywood side, in this sense that on the one hand, so much of what comes out of Hollywood, even to this day, celebrates values that are completely contradictory to the natural law and to the biblical view of morality. At the same time, however, anytime Hollywood wants to give a transcendent touch to a film, they go to Catholic spaces and oftentimes include Catholic priests.
Yeah.
So what do you think explains that kind of dialectic there?
There is something cinematic about Catholicism, because we're a colorful religion and we use symbols creatively. I used to think when I was in Paris, years ago, I go into the Sainte-Chapelle, one of the most beautiful places in the world, and you look at this brilliant stained glass. You say, well, that's film in a way. It's these colored pictures telling a story. And so from the beginning, or you go to the facade of the Orvieto Cathedral in Italy, and you look up at this magnificent, and the right word is cinematic kind of display of biblical history in color and character. So I think there's always been a sort of affinity between Catholicism and its use of the symbolic, the artistic, the colorful, the pictorial, where, let's face it, Protestantism often began with an iconoclastic move to get rid of, the pictures and the statues and so on. So there's an affinity there, I think, between film, cinema, and Catholicism. And I'll say more about this when we get into our topic. I think my old friend Andrew Greeley from Chicago said, priests are fascinating. And a lot of the fascination comes from celibacy. Yeah. Andy Greeley said that years ago. He was a great defender of celibacy. And he said a lot of the fascination with priests comes from celibacy. And so films have, I think, gravitate toward priests. They find priests fascinating. So those are a couple of connections.
So one more general question before we start looking at some of those films. One way that Christians in general have responded to sort of the general exclusion from Hollywood is to found their own film industries and make films that are unapologetically Christian, overtly Christian, and marketed to Christian audiences. Do you find this to be a promising way of either making good films, substantially good films, or even of evangelization? Is this something that's advisable?
Yeah, I think it can be. Look at Angel Studios and The Chosen and all that. I think has been a very positive thing. So sure, if that's a way to get around a very oppressive, let's say, film industry that's excluding religion. At the same time, I think you can find ways in mainstream movies to bring biblical Christian themes into them, and maybe that will give you a wider, reach. Both and, I think. I think of Thomas Merton's line about, a bad book about the love of God is still a bad book. So if you're making a movie, it's about, Jesus, but if it's poorly made, poorly written, poorly acted, the cinematography is low level, it's still a bad movie, even though it's about the best possible subject. So the key is to tell the story, but using the best, cinema techniques and acting and so on. And there have certainly been examples of that in recent years. Look at Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. And, movies made at a very high level that are clearly expounding religious points of view.
Let's now look at some of those pivotal movies depicting Catholicism and Catholic priests. And the first on our list is the Oscar-winning 1938 classic, so all the way back in 1938 classic, Boys Town, with the iconic priest character, Father Flanagan. Bishop, say a little bit about the enduring significance of this film.
It's funny, we said 19, I would have said, I guess like 1940, but it's 38. Yeah, 38. Really goes back. Well, it's a movie I watched as a kid. In Chicago, there was a program called Family Classics, and it was on Sunday afternoon. They always showed kind of classic movies, and that was always one of them, Boys Town. And the great Spencer Tracy, one of the best actors of that era, right? And the very young Mickey Rooney plays this kind of tough kid, Whitey Marsh, right? And I got a personal connection to that movie, which is interesting. My uncle was a Christian brother, my mother's older brother. And he was a Christian brother, went to school here in my diocese in Winona, right? But as a young brother, he was assigned to Boys Town as I don't know what he was, a disciplinarian or something. But he knew Father Flanagan, the founder of Boys Town.
Yeah.
And during the screening of the movie, and they screened it at Boys Town, Spencer Tracy and Mickey Rooney came, And my uncle said he sat right next to Father Flanagan during the screening. And I said, wow, what? Did he like the movie? And he said, he fell sound asleep on my shoulder. I always love that. Because it's not a movie you'd fall asleep during. It's a very good movie.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you a simple thing I really like about him, besides, the acting and all that, is it portrays a priest doing something that's typically priestly, which is going into difficult places and difficult situations to bring the gospel. So the story hinges upon Whitey has this older brother who's a gangster of some kind, right? And he's in trouble, and he says to Father Flanagan, I want you to take care of my kid brother, And so Flanagan goes into wherever Whitey was in some kind of I don't know where he was, bar or something. And, Whitey is just playing this difficult, tough guy. And Flanagan is a tough guy too. He's a kind of a man's man priest, and he handles it, and he establishes the right relationship between him and Whitey, and Whitey is completely opposed to it, but he gets him to Boys Town. And then, as the story unfolds through all kinds of ups and downs, but Whitey is sort of redeemed. He's redeemed, though, by Christ working through a priest who was willing to go into really dark, difficult situation. When I was teaching at Mundelein years ago, I used to say to the students, do you like sinners? Because if you don't, you shouldn't be a priest. I mean, you can be a religious person, you can theorize about religion, you can go to Mass on Sunday, but if you want to be a priest, priests have to like sinners. I'm not saying you like sin, but you got to be able to go into the places where sinners are. And it might not be your thing, it might not be where you're most comfortable, but you move into those sometimes dark, difficult spaces. And I see Father Flanagan as an example of that he moved into Whitey's space and met with a lot of resistance and eventually brought him, to redemption. That's what priests do. That's where they go.
The second film on our list here is the 1973 film, The Exorcist, directed by William Friedkin. Bishop, give us a broad overview of the plot and your initial experience seeing it for the first time.
Well, first can I give you, there's another personal connection there. Friedkin you mentioned, right, who just died, maybe it was last year or the year before. But I'm in my house in Santa Barbara. I'm bishop out there. And the secretary comes and she goes, there's a Mr. Friedkin on the line for you. And I said, William Friedkin? And she goes, I think. She didn't know who he was. So I get on the phone, and sure enough, he said, this is, I think, Bill Friedkin. I said, the director of The Exorcist and French Connection? And yeah. Well, long story short, his last movie was a documentary on the Pope's exorcist, Father Amorth, right?
Yeah.
And he was interviewing people, and he had stumbled on, I think I did a little commentary on The Exorcist many years ago on YouTube, and he stumbled on it, right? And he said, let me talk to this bishop about the Catholic Church and exorcism. So out he came to my house. He was 80-something at the time, seemed 20 years younger, very youthful guy. A lot of fun, very interesting. Interviewed me about exorcism. And then we had lunch at my house. And we met one more time, Friedkin and I, because on my desk, he noticed these people giving me these little Simpsons figurines, He goes, oh, you like the Simpsons? I said, I love The Simpsons. He goes, well, in 3 weeks, I'm going to go for a table reading of The Simpsons because I'm going to be in one of the episodes, right? He goes, do you want to come? And I said, it was the Pope Catholic? Of course I want to come. And so I did. I attended a table reading of The Simpsons with William Friedkin. So that's how strange my life had become at that point. Anyway, that's my connection personally to The Exorcist. I wouldn't have seen it in the theater because I was too young. I would have been 13 when that came out. It was an R-rated movie, When did I first see it? I don't know. Later on TV, I guess it was, I slept with the lights on for 6 days.
Yeah.
I mean, it terrified me more than any movie I'd ever seen. I still think number one most terrifying.
Why is that movie so scary?
Because it's not just startling, it's so deeply creepy. See, that's a distinction that Father Steve, the CEO of Word on Fire, gave me. Startling is easy to do. Startling is a physical thing, like, oh, so you see someone around. But when a movie's creepy, it's unnerving in an increasing way. And that's what The Exorcist does, because you've got this young girl and these weird things are happening. And they see doctors and they see psychiatrists. She's got a spinal tap. They're trying to figure out. And her behavior is getting weirder and weirder. And there's a younger priest who's seen as circa early 70s, kind of a hip guy, smart. He's a Jesuit priest, but he's really into psychology and really into, I'm not an old-fashioned, I'm a guy of the present day. And so he approaches it, in a very kind of skeptical, secularized way. She's just got some psychological problem. But as he starts working with her, he's like, oh my goodness, there's something here that I don't know. Bob Dylan's line, something's happening here, but you don't know what it is, do you, Mr. Jones? I mean, It was that kind of thing for him, like, okay, until he realizes this is beyond me, right? At which point the old priest is called in, Father Barron, played by the great Max von Sydow, the actor, again, who died not long ago, a few years ago. Played Jesus, remember in The Great Story Ever Told.
Oh, right.
And he's still a pretty young man. They heavily made him up for The Exorcist. But he plays an old man. He knows what's going on. He knows this is not some psychological aberration. This is not a physical problem. The young priest, when the old guy arrives for the exorcism, and he says, well, I've been analyzing her. I think there's, it's a dual personality. And he goes, no, there's one enemy here. And then he prays. He starts praying the rosary. And I remember, now this is some years later. I'd first seen it, on TV, but then many years later, I knew The Exorcist in Chicago. And when the movie was re-released, there was great interest in it. And Cardinal George at the time asked me, because he don't want to reveal the identity of the exorcist, he said, would you be willing to talk to these people about exorcism and all that? So I was like a spokesperson. I thought, I better see the movie again so it's fresh in my mind. So another surreal moment in my life, with The Exorcist of Chicago, I went to a theater and watched the movie.
Gosh.
Yeah, I know, it was terrifying. But I remember at that moment, when the old guy has come, the old priest, and he starts praying, I said to the exorcist next to me, finally, someone knows what to do. That we've been messing around in this movie with doctors and psychologists and all this modernism. Finally, someone knows what to do. And then, of course, the two priests perform the exorcism, right? So it's very interesting from that standpoint of real priesthood. Doesn't eschew psychology and all that, but its orientation is finally supernatural. If you're a priest and you're uneasy with the supernatural, you're in the wrong business.
Yeah.
You don't get the fact there's a world beyond the world we can see. You're not at home with the mystical, the supernatural, the miraculous. You're in the wrong business. See, and the young priest, I think the movie's a commentary on the young priest, that he had lost his way. And the old priest is bringing him back online. Now, I'm going to give away the ending, but it's such an old movie. Everyone knows the ending by now. That both priests die in the course of the exorcism. Remember? The old guy dies of, he has a heart attack during the thing from the stress of it. But the young priest at the end, says to the devil, come into me, right? And then he's thrown out the window down the staircase and he dies. And I think what's most interesting there is you have two priests who give their lives for this little girl whom they didn't really know. I mean, the young priest knew her better. The old priest barely knew her at all. But they gave their lives to save this young girl. And that lovely scene at the very end, I wonder if people remember, but what was her name? Reagan was the young girl's name, remember? So she's free now of the devil. And she and her mother are moving away. They want to get out of that house, understandably. And she sees this priest has arrived to say goodbye or something. Not, the two are gone, the two exorcists. But she sees the collar, and they come in tight. They show the Roman collar. And then she doesn't remember the exorcism at all. But something triggers the reaction. She goes up and she kisses him on the cheek, out of gratitude to the priest. So to me, it's just a beautiful thing about the supernatural orientation of the priest's life, but also his willingness to die. The priest is willing to die to serve his people. I don't think he'll be embarrassed to hear me say this. I think he's talked about it, but Archbishop Chaput, the great former Archbishop of Philadelphia, always said it's his favorite movie about the priesthood, The Exorcist, and that he would show it to his seminarians to give them a sense of what the priesthood is about. And I get what he means. I think he means exactly this, the supernatural orientation and the willingness to go all the way to give your life for your people. So that's why I love the movie. Scary as all get out, still spooky movie to watch. But it's ultimately about the priesthood, I think.
Now, Bishop, you very frequently get requests to talk about demonic possession, and you often say, of course, it's real, but we shouldn't focus on it.
Yeah.
So how should we, especially from an evangelical perspective, recognize its reality, but not do so in a way that sort of sensationalizes it and makes it
and
focus
just
there?
What you said there. I mean, to recognize it, acknowledge it, realize the church has means of dealing with it, but then let it go, because the devil wants us to become obsessed with all these details. The devil typically works through temptation and insinuation and suggestion, and so he's got a lot of other ways to influence us, which he loves to use. So we should be aware of that, the spiritual struggle, and be aware that this other dimension exists and that the church has a way of dealing with it. And I would just say, focus on these heroic priests in that movie. That's really what it's about.
The third film on our list is True Confessions, which stars Robert De Niro and Robert Duvall, who just recently passed away.
Right, yeah. I remember seeing that movie and really liking it, appreciating it. I mean, one is you got two of the finest actors of the last, 50 years, Duvall, and then who else is in it? You've got the great Burgess Meredith is in that movie. There's really great acting going on. I'll just say something brief about it. It's set in Los Angeles, and so when I became bishop out there, that movie came back to my mind. De Niro plays this priest who is, he's just perfect. His suit is always pressed beautifully. His Roman collar is always in place. His hair is perfect. He's the bishop's assistant. He is in touch with all the leading figures of Los Angeles. He's a cool cat. He speaks at banquets. When he goes to play golf, he puts on this impeccable golf outfit with a little hat and a sweater. The locker room, everything is just perfectly arranged, And it's a story about this guy who is deeply ambitious. He's moving in high circles. He's living a life that's very careful because he has this career ambition. We hear at a key moment in the movie that the bishop, the Archbishop of LA, I just put your name in to become auxiliary bishop, and I've got every confidence it'll be accepted. And so it's like, okay, this guy's got it together. Well, the story unfolds because his brother, played by Robert Duvall, is a hard-nosed cop in Los Angeles, and he's trying to solve this really kind of weird, kinky murder thing going on, right? So long story short, the priest is not like directly at all involved, but he kind of like by smear campaigns gets indirectly implicated, in that. And he finds his whole thing falls apart with scandal and loss of reputation. And he ends up, though, the movie ends, De Niro now is an old man, this old retired priest, and he's a retired pastor in this parish way out in the desert east of L.A. It would now be the Diocese of San Bernardino, but in those days it would have still been L.A. Archdiocese. So he's way far away from the city and power and ambition and the church, government. He's way out in the desert in this little parish, and his brother drives out there, and now they're both old men to visit him, And what you notice at the very end of the movie is that he's completely liberated. This guy whose whole life had been just so, buttoned down and tied to his ambition. He left all that behind. He's now detached from that and has found real joy and real peace in this simple life as a desert pastor. And then the movie ends with he says, "This is my grave. I'm going to be buried out here," And I've always loved it for a lot of reasons, but one is it talks about that shadow side of the priesthood that can take over a priest, especially one who's gifted, can just get into this sort of ambitious route and becomes a captive of it. That's what I see in De Niro's performance, and he's a good guy and he's doing nothing bad, but he's held captive by his own ambition. And when he was finally freed from that, he's able to find real joy and real peace. So I just like that, contrast. Of
course, another pivotal film is the 1986 movie by Roland Joffe, The Mission.
Oh, yeah, The Mission.
What stands out to you in this film? Of so many different things you could talk about.
Yeah.
Address the role of the priest and the religious.
Yeah.
In particular.
Well, again, De Niro is in that.
Yeah, right.
And he plays, it's very interesting. I've talked about it in different contexts because he plays this desperate, hardened slave trader. Just his whole life is about capturing poor people and selling them into slavery. He's a terrible man, right? And it's a long story, but he undergoes this conversion. And there's this beautiful scene where he compels himself to carry across this rough terrain a net carrying all the accoutrement of his former life, right?
Yeah, right.
A beautiful scene because his friends say, haven't you done enough? And they cut the thing, and he goes, no. And he ties it back on and continues. So it's this great story there of letting go of an old life and converting. And he becomes a Jesuit brother, right? Under the tutelage of Jeremy Irons, who plays this heroic Jesuit priest, missionary in South America. And together they build this beautiful community down there, kind of a idyllic community of the native people whom they've converted to the faith, and they form this community, build these churches, and they start educating the kids and so on. And then they get caught up in this terrible struggle. It's the time when the Jesuits were under pressure and they were going to be suppressed, and the powers in Europe wanted basically to eliminate this mission, right? And so the two priests, the priest, Jeremy Irons, and then De Niro, the brother, face this great dilemma. How do we oppose these forces? And Jeremy Irons does it through nonviolence. The movie ends with he's carrying the Blessed Sacrament in a monstrance, and with his people kind of huddling around him, walk toward those who are shooting at them. And they accept, they nonviolently resist. De Niro is part of a violent resistance, right? They both die, so they're both killed, and that's kind of really how the movie ends, in this unresolved way. And here's my personal connection to this movie. In that movie, in a very minor role, is Daniel Berrigan. Now, I don't know if a lot of our listeners know that name, but he was very prominent back in like the 60s, 70s. He was a radical Jesuit. The Catonsville Nine, he was part of this group that was burning draft cards and all that. He was a radical priest. Well, he's in this movie. He plays this older Jesuit, accompanying the priest. Well, anyway, Berrigan in the 90s shows up at Mundelein Seminary, where I was, to give a talk. And I'm on the faculty. So he was there. And then afterwards, he had a little session with the faculty. And so I said to him, Father, I love the movie The Mission, and I know you're in that, and wondering what's your take on the final scene. And he said, well, the director just wanted to show these two options. A priest, they're both priests with their people, one doing it nonviolently, one violently. And then Berrigan said, obviously, I'm on the nonviolent side, but the director wanted just to show both of those. I just love the Jeremy Irons character, the priest, because so many dimensions of it. His courage that he goes into this completely alien environment and expecting his death at almost any minute, but courageously goes into that and then brings the faith to the people, stands with them in their good times and stands with them in the worst of times, and opposes the enemies with the power of the gospel and the Eucharist, and just that image of him carrying the Blessed Sacrament with his people facing their enemies. That's a priest. That's That's Maximilian Kolbe, and that's all kinds of people. So I love that image of solidarity with his people, even to the point of giving his life.
So the final film we have on our list here, and there's many more that we'd like to do perhaps for a future episode, is the 2014 John Michael McDonagh film, which takes place in a post-Christian Ireland called Calvary.
Yeah.
Bishop, the physical, the social, and religious landscape in that movie is all so bleak. Do you think that it gives an accurate portrayal of the state of Christianity in Europe and Ireland in particular?
I hope not entirely. That's 2014, huh? So I would have been rector at Mundelein. And because I remember telling the students, go see this movie. because it's a great movie about the priesthood. To put it in encapsulated form, it's a priest who finds out in the confessional that there's a young man who's going to kill him. Not because he's done something to him, but the young man had been abused. And, he's in Ireland where that was a terrible issue. And it's simply out of his anger and desire for retribution. He said, I am going to kill you on Sunday. And so the movie unfolds as like a Holy Week as this priest is walking toward his own death. And he knows that. All the while putting up with the worst abuse from the people around him. Because as you say, it's suggesting the very worst of Irish antipathy now toward the faith. He's a formerly married man. His wife had died. Then he became a priest. And so he's a guy with a lot of experience, a lot of integrity. And he's facing Calvary. Constant, they're spitting at him. They're spitting words at him, retribution at him. But he just is calmly going about his work of trying to bring Christ to them. And then at the end, succumbs. He accepts death, and he is indeed killed by this man. When, see, at any moment, he could have fled, right? He could have left. He could have turned the guy in, but then he would have violated the seal of confession. But he doesn't. He walks through Holy Week, and he walks his way up Calvary and accepts his death, right? So it's like the priest not just offering the sacrifice of Christ, but in a way becoming the sacrifice of Christ. Yeah. Fulton Sheen said that. The priest is not his own. Yes, indeed, that we offer at the Mass the sacrifice of Christ, but we also are called, we're both priest and victim, as Christ was, right? The priest, the ordained priest, is both priest and victim and offers himself as a sacrifice. My sense of that movie is it's a priest willing to offer himself as a sacrifice in reparation for the sins of the church, reparation for this terrible, moral outrage. And then the movie ends with the priest's daughter, so from his married time, offering forgiveness, right, to the man who had killed her father. That's what Christianity opens up. That's what it awakens, right? Is when we're willing to become identified with the sacrifice of Christ, forgiveness bursts into the world. Mm-hmm. So it's priest as sacrifice. That's what I'm noticing in Calvary. Very powerfully told movie. As we rehearse these, it's interesting to me that they are, in their different ways, pointing at the real radicality of the priesthood, if you construe it the right way. It's not just, a nice guy doing social service for people. It's someone being conformed unto Christ with all that means.
That's beautiful. Before we turn to our listener question, Bishop, what's some general advice that you'd offer to filmmakers, those in the creative industries, both Catholic and non-Catholic, on how to portray Catholicism and the priesthood, some sort of do's and don'ts?
That's a good question. I guess take it with this kind of moral seriousness that it deserves. There are superficial ways you can do it in a cutesy pie way, or just look at the superficial appeal of certain things, or you can do it in a hypercritical way, just be dismissal because it's full of corruption. Rather see the real drama at the heart of it. I think too of Hitchcock's movie, I Confess, about a priest facing the dilemma of breaking the seal of confession. That there's all kinds of drama built into the life of a priest. And you don't have to trivialize things or just hyper-criticize, but you can find that very dramatic space. And again, to quote Greeley, that priests are fascinating. And I remember when he made that comment, it was about the Thornbirds. Remember that novel, and this made for TV, and it's about a priest in Australia and all his ups and downs and affairs and various things. And Father, why are people watching this? He said, priests are fascinating. So I think find the inherent drama within the priesthood.
And from the audience perspective, some general advice: how seriously should we take what comes out of Hollywood in terms of spiritual guidance and spiritual nourishment? Well,
what did Paul say? Test all things. And take in what's good and reject what's evil. There's a lot of nonsense coming out of Hollywood and a lot of triviality and a lot of silliness and stupidity. So I get all that. But look at the ones we just talked about, and they've covered a lot of years. There are, I think, spiritually serious movies that come out. And when you find them, trumpet them, talk about them. I've often said, a problem you'll face is okay, well, Boys Town, I'll watch that from 1938. But anything that's, past 1965 and things get a little too, realistic, well, I don't know. I don't think we can afford to be quite that squeamish. I think, we can't be so puritanical that we can't take in the reality, the spiritual truth of these movies that are gritty, but heck, the saints go into gritty places. Yeah. I used to tell my students, because they would sometimes say, oh, how could you watch that movie? It had people with the F word and these terrible things. I used to say, whatever the Aramaic version of the F word was, I don't know what it was. What was the worst thing you could say to someone in first century? I said, trust me, Jesus heard it.
Yeah.
Right? And so I don't think that should just be, oh gosh, they did terrible things in that movie. I can't watch it. The Bible, if you filmed it, at least an R rating. At least an R rating if you film the Bible. So I think we can be too squeamish about that. And it's not for everybody. Okay. I'm not going to, tell my grandmother, you would love The Exorcist. I'm not. But I don't think we can afford to be quite that puritanical.
It is now time for our listener question.
Okay.
Today we have Philip from Gloucestershire in the UK. Asking about the relationship between your work as the founder of Word on Fire Catholic Ministries and the great Saint Thérèse of Lisieux.
Oh, okay.
Hello, Bishop Barron. My name's Philip from Gloucestershire in England. I've just watched again the Catholicism series, and I read the credits at the end this time, and I see that there's a thanks to Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, the little flower, for making the impossible possible. I wonder whether you'd like to enlarge on that, tell us the story behind that. I've got a great devotion to the little flower. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'd forgotten about that. At the very end of the credits, I think we say that. Well, she's one of the great patrons of Word on Fire, Thomas Aquinas being the other one who's played a key role in my life. The little flower, I can't tell the whole story. It's too involved. But when I was in France, I really cultivated a great devotion to her. And I think she's been a great guide to our work because she's the patroness of the missions. And I really see Word on Fire, this evangelical work, is very much mission-oriented. And so we invoke her all the time. And I think that line, just whenever we found things impossible, and when we're making that film years ago, we had no office or anything. We had no money. We had nothing. And we just had this idea, and we scraped money together. I often asked her, to intercede and help us. And when we were filming, many times you face just difficulties and obstacles and problems. And then the economy collapsed when we were filming that thing. And so a lot of our donors backed out. So we just kept begging her all the time, and I still do. So that's how she made the impossible possible. And, I maintain that great devotion to her. And I think she's a guide to our missionary work.
Well, thanks so much, Philip, for reaching out to us. If you would like to ask Bishop Barron a question for a future Word on Fire show, please visit askbishopbarron.com. Again, that's askbishopbarron.com. We're always grateful to hear from you. Bishop, we're at time, but thank you again for a very rich conversation.
Yeah, that was fun, man. Thanks.
That does it for us today. Thanks for joining us on the Word on Fire show. If you're interested in learning more about how Word on Fire can help you grow closer to Christ, become a better evangelist with and for others, and work for the common good, consider joining the Word on Fire Institute. Check us out at institute.wordonfire.org. That's institute.wordonfire.org. And we'll see you next time.